Most women have entered a man's life. Few have entered his mind. Fewer still have ever slipped beneath the surface and lodged themselves into his subconscious architecture, the place where dreams are coded, shadows hide, and mother wounds speak more loudly than logic. You don't get there by being pretty. You don't get there by being perfect. You get there by being real, real enough to disturb him, to shatter the persona he wears to survive, to mirror back the boy beneath the man and the fears beneath the bravado. There's a moment, subtle as smoke, when a man meets a woman and something in him pauses, not because she fits into his plans, but because she slips between them. She doesn't knock on the doors of his ego-seeking entry. She walks past the guards of his conscious mind and begins whispering to something older, deeper, and dust-covered within him. That's when everything changes, not just for her but for him. What most call chemistry, Carl Jung would call archetypal activation. She becomes not just a person but a symbol, a portal, a psychic key. Sometimes she evokes awe, sometimes fear, sometimes a rage that makes no sense. But if you look closely, you'll see it, the tremble in his mask, the glitch in his performance. You've touched something he didn't know was exposed. And no, it's not always romantic. Sometimes it's cold. Sometimes it's distant. Sometimes his reaction is silence or sabotage. Because the subconscious doesn't speak in flowers, it speaks in instincts, defense mechanisms, and repressed voices clawing their way back to awareness. A woman who enters a man's subconscious disorders his script. She forces him into confrontation with the emotions he packed away in childhood, wrapped in stoicism, soaked in pride, buried in masculine obligation. She becomes the image of tension between who he believes he is and who he never dared to be. He may laugh harder around her, or go quiet. He might stare longer, or avoid eye contact altogether. He might crave her in ways that feel sacred, or run like she's a flame sent to burn down his composure. But the reaction is never logical, never linear, because she doesn't just stand in front of him, she appears inside him. And here's the cruelty of it, she often doesn't even know. She may question herself, feeling the vacuum of his retreat after glimpses of closeness. She might think she imagined the spark, misread the depth, tried too hard. But if she pays attention, not to his words but to the disruptions, she'll know. Not all longing looks are romantic. Some are confrontational. Some say, "Who gave you permission to see me?" Because the subconscious is not a comfortable place. It is raw, uncurated, and filled with symbols more ancient than memory. And when a woman activates those symbols in a man, she becomes more than herself in his eyes. She becomes projection. Jung called it the anima, the internal feminine within the male psyche. When she awakes, she doesn't ask for permission. She drags his unresolved attachments, his buried grief, and unmet maternal longing to the surface. She returns him to the place he splits off from feeling and demands he feel. You will know you've entered his subconscious not when he gives you his time, but when he becomes inconsistent with himself. When the man you met begins to shift. When his certainty fractures. When the voice that once played smooth now catches in quiet. That is where the battle begins, not between the two of you but within himself. You are no longer a name in his phone. You are a mirror in his psyche. Many women mistake his pullback as rejection, but in truth, it is often a regression, a return to his inner boy sprinting from a fire he cannot explain. You've become the dream he didn't know he had until you disturbed his sleep. And make no mistake, disturbance is intimacy on a soul level. Nothing inside the subconscious is calm. It is not where we love neatly. It is where we remember painfully. So when he disappears, or stares, or tells you he doesn't know why he reacts so strongly to you. You're not witnessing confusion. You're witnessing the first sign. He doesn't yet have language for what you are. Because you are not just a woman in his world. You are a symbol walking in his sleep. He may try to reassert control. He may reframe you quickly, desperately into something more manageable, just a phase, just attraction, too intense. This is not clarity, this is containment, because a man's psyche is built not to surrender but to structure. And when you slide into the fluid gaps of that structure, you unsettle the foundation. So he reaches for bricks, labels, distance, silence. Anything that keeps him from remembering how much of you remains when you are no longer in the room. You've left fingerprints not on his skin but on his ego boundary. You've pressed into the membrane between who he thinks he is and who he has not yet dared to become. And that is no small intrusion. That is psychic trespass. And only a few women ever make it that far. Because most connections stay in the visible world. The world of dinners, dates, schedules, and names. Surface interactions with surface masks, but occasionally someone touches symbol. Someone reaches past the role and speaks to the wound. Jung called this a constellation, when an inner complex is activated so profoundly it overtakes the ego. He may joke that you're intense, but what he really means is, you woke something I buried. There is no formula to unlock it, no script to recite, because this is not a game of logic or seductive performance. This is archetypal alchemy, and you, unknowingly, have become the alchemist. You did not come offering instruction, you simply mirrored back more than he wanted to see. Your softness reminded him of vulnerability. Your strength threatened his control. Your silence echoed every mother who didn't hold him. Your knowing eyes saw through the man-made shell into something tender, exposed. And depending on his level of integration, that can feel either like salvation or like war. Because for many men, the feminine subconscious is mother, and if the mother was absent, chaotic, punishing, conditional, so too will be the reaction to any woman who provokes that phantom. He may crave you and flee you in the same breath, want your warmth but not your witness. Because though he sought a woman, what he received was an encounter with himself. He cannot stay long in your presence without encountering the shadow, and the shadow, once stirred, begins to howl. It accuses, projects, resists. But beneath it all, it remembers. And if you stay long enough or even leave with enough impact, that memory will plant itself like a seed, not of desire but of deep inquiry. You'll notice it in his language. Disorganized, doubting, emotional flashes where there was once stoicism. The man who prided himself on logic now speaks in questions. The once certain becomes quiet, not withdrawn but unsettled. You've entered the dream space. Because the subconscious doesn't react with words, it reacts with disturbance. Dreams, confusion, sudden triggers. He sees your face in strangers, finds your voice in abstract places, doesn't understand why certain songs suddenly ache. This is not magic, it is memory reactivated. You didn't try to be unforgettable. You simply showed up as a reflection that his internal world could not digest, yet could not ignore. He may try to categorize you, to make the feeling easier to dismiss, to file it under the usual excuses. She was emotional, too deep, too much. But do not mistake this for rejection. It is psychic displacement. When a man cannot comprehend something deeply true, he will protect himself by calling it false. That is not a reflection of your worth. It is a symptom of his resistance. And here is the paradox. The more he resists you, the longer you live inside him. Because repression creates fixation. Avoidance breeds obsession. What he won't face, he won't forget. He may go on, date others, smile easily, perform normalcy. But there will be moments, quiet, private moments, when your voice returns not as memory but as mirror. You weren't a moment. You were a message, and he's only just beginning to read it. Most men aren't haunted by the women who wanted them. They are haunted by the women who saw them. And this is the second sign, when a man begins to contradict himself around you without realizing it. He says one thing, then acts another. He claims to move on, yet circles back emotionally. He distances himself, only to watch you closely from afar. He tells his friends you're not a big deal, yet cannot stop referencing you in metaphors, frustrations, or silence. This isn't manipulation, it's fragmentation. The ego tries to protect him from psychic disorientation, but the subconscious doesn't obey rules. It doesn't resolve like a clean equation. It loops. It repeats. It returns to what is unresolved. And when you've lodged yourself inside that unresolved place, your presence becomes a symbol, not of what he wants, but of what he needs to face. The feminine force, when real, rooted, and unbending, does not gently console a man's ego. It cracks it open, not to judge but to reveal. And the archetype of the woman who disturbed everything lives vividly in the masculine mind. She may not be the one who stayed, but she is the one he cannot replace. Jung wrote of the anima not as a fantasy, but as a fragmented image of everything unresolved within a man's feminine psyche, often projected outward, often misunderstood, and rarely integrated. And when you carry that projection, you inherit its chaos. You are both magnet and mirror. His pull toward you is not always attraction, it is recognition. But recognition without readiness becomes persecution. He blames you for what he's never reconciled, accuses you of causing the storm you merely reflected, because if he truly admitted the truth, that you saw him RLY before he did, it would shatter the illusions he has built like walls around a terracotta heart. And this is what makes you unforgettable. Not your beauty, not your voice, but your vision. You carried no false comfort. You offered no lie. You did not build him up with flattery. You simply existed with presence so unflinching that it made his performance shiver under its own weight. Not every man can love a woman like that. Not because she's unlovable, but because she's unforgettable. She lives in every silent moment he has with himself. Her absence is not a void, but a presence of its own. The woman who knows. The woman who saw. And the third sign often follows closely behind contradiction, emotional projection. He begins to speak of you in exaggerated tones, too much, too distant, too intense, because he is now speaking not to you, but to the parts of himself you activated. You may become crazy in his narrative, dramatic, too sensitive. But these are not reflections of your behavior. They are reflections of parts of himself he is unwilling to hold. You didn't do anything, except exist in a way that illuminated what he buried. You became not just a woman he met, but a character in his psychic myth. And how he rewrites you reveals what he's still at war with within himself. This is not personal, it is psychological, it is archetypal. You may be punished for being accurate. You may lose him for being too true. But let this be known. To enter a man's subconscious is to pierce the veil between his ego and his initiation. Some cross that threshold with seduction, others with chaos, but a rare few do so by simply bearing witness to the truth he hides from himself. And once you've done that, no one feels like you. Because you were never a feeling. You were a mirror. And once seen, it cannot be unseen. He may go looking for someone quieter, someone who doesn't reflect quite so clearly, and he may even find her. For a while, he will be more comfortable, more controlled, more intact. Until one night, alone, staring at the ceiling or scrolling through songs, he realizes he doesn't feel anything. Because she didn't reach the place you went. She didn't enter the gates you passed. She hasn't set foot in the dream he's still trying to forget. And that silence becomes the fourth sign, not your silence, but the one he feels inside himself in your absence. It is not quiet, it is echo. The echo is never immediate. It swells through time. It waits for him in the in-between, those untraceable spaces between distraction and sleep, between the next woman and the unresolved memory of the last. It rattles through his psyche like a half-remembered melody, haunting not because it was loud, but because it was never finished. This is the fourth sign, the phantom resonance of a woman who entered his subconscious and then vanished, gracefully, without drama, without begging. Her absence becomes the presence. For most women, to be forgotten means failure. But for those who have touched something deeper, disappearance is power. Because the subconscious does not forget what disturbed it. In fact, it clings. It clutches. Not with awareness, but with symbols, slips of the tongue, dreams that feel like warnings. The woman who shaped him from the inside out no longer needs space in his calendar to take up space in his mind. She has become myth, not because she tried, but because she triggered memory, layers beneath logic. Have you ever wondered why some men spiral after a seemingly simple goodbye? Why they seem fine, only to reach out weeks, months later, fragmented, triggered, unmoored? It's not your body he missed. It's the mirror you held to his soul that no one else dares to lift. That mirror wasn't polished. It didn't flatter. It didn't feed him. It confronted. And sometimes, confrontation feels like rejection, especially when he's not ready to claim the reflection. But what he calls emotional chaos was likely the closest he's come to truth in years. Because a man can only hide from himself for so long, the psyche will correct, the subconscious will resurface, and when it does so with images, symbols, feelings that don't belong to the present moment. That's when you reappear, not in person but in pattern. He sees her smile, but remembers your silence. He hears her laugh, but feels your restraint. He holds her hand, but recalls the way you never reached for his, yet somehow made him feel completely held. This is not comparison. This is imprint. A subconscious imprint is not a choice. It's archetypal magnetism. You didn't show up to compete. You showed up as activation, and activation never leaves quietly. Jung spoke often of the tension between opposites, the conscious and the unconscious, the persona and the shadow, the masculine and the feminine within. And when you enter a man's subconscious, you become the tension he can't resolve. You become the rope pulled taut between who he is and who he's terrified to become. If he is not ready to meet himself on that level, he will call you the problem and miss you forever. So what do? Do you chase him down, explain your depth, convince him of your purity? No, because the woman who enters the subconscious does not perform. She exists. And in that existence, she awakens what performance cannot bury. She walks away not because she lacks love, but because she refuses to shrink into a version of herself that makes him more comfortable. Her very refusal becomes his mirror, and few things echo louder in a man's soul than the woman who chooses herself before he ever learns how to. Understand this. If you have entered his subconscious, you will feel it before he does. You will feel the glitch, the resistance, the inexplicable draw followed by disappearance. And if you are not rooted in your own knowing, You may confuse his symptom with your failure, but don't. Because the fifth sign isn't something you see. It's something he doesn't understand. Disorientation, confusion, the inability to move on properly. He may keep going through the motions, post the photos, date the options, smile through the numbness, but it won't feel the same, because the same ended with you. You weren't just part of a phase, you were part of his reprogramming. And the deeper the reprogramming, the longer the rejection. That is the paradox. He may resent you most when you've changed him the deepest. But don't be mistaken, people forget moments, they forget words, they forget touch, but they never forget the one who made them question who they are. You became a fault line in his foundation, an interruption in his autopilot. You existed like a pause between heartbeats, and now that pause is permanent. And when permanence takes root in the subconscious, it no longer speaks in longing, it speaks in recalibration. That's the sixth sign. He begins to change without knowing why. He changes what he tolerates. He changes what he seeks. He changes how he sees himself, as if peeling off masks that no longer fit. But he doesn't always realize that you were the trigger. A man rarely attributes his transformation to the woman who initiated it, especially if she did so not by teaching, but by embodying what he wasn't ready for. He won't say your name aloud. He may not even contact you. But make no mistake, your influence lingers like a scent in the walls of his inner world. You were more than a woman he met. You were a threshold. And once crossed, thresholds don't uncross. This is why so many women feel confused when the man who once ran from their depth becomes better for the next one. Softer, more open, more present. It's infuriating, isn't it? That he couldn't stay and grow with you, yet seems to grow after you. But this is the unseen tragedy of subconscious impact. Not every woman gets to reap the fruit of the seeds she plants, especially when she plants them in the soil of inner transformation. You didn't just meet a man, you met his shadow, and you left a mark on it. And so he upgrades. Not because he wants to, but because he has to. Your presence made who he was unbearable to remain. It's a quiet evolution, one he won't always talk about. Maybe he stops chasing women who feel easy. Maybe he pays more attention to his inner world. Maybe he begins to read books on self-awareness, reflect on his past, take responsibility for his trauma patterns. A man rarely changes for someone who comforts him. He changes for someone who confronted him without saying a word. That confrontation wasn't loud. It was the way you didn't chase. The way you stayed still in the face of confusion. The way you loved without collapsing. The way you walked away without asking to be followed. These subtle acts echo louder than any monologue. The subconscious doesn't respond to speech. It responds to symbol. And you, unknowingly, became a symbol of the feminine he had long repressed, long rejected, long misunderstood, but could never quite stop seeking. Somewhere in his emotional DNA, your presence coded a shift. And while he may never say it out loud, you'll see it in the way he begins to speak about the women he values, the way he recalibrates his boundaries, the way he begins to desire peace over pursuit. The woman of chaos triggered adrenaline. You triggered integration. He may still be haunted, not by loss, but by a new standard of resonance, by a frequency he cannot find again in counterfeit connections. And once the soul has tasted truth, it starves around performance. By this point, he no longer runs from your memory. He returns to it not for nostalgia but for reference. You've become the blueprint, not of perfection, but of alignment. And this is where your power culminates, not in being wanted again, but in being unavoidable. Unavoidable in how deeply you made him feel. unavoidable in the way silence became presence, unavoidable in the memory of his own inadequacy, reflected through your stillness, unavoidable in the grace with which you left firm, wordless, and free. You didn't just enter his life. You entered the psychic library of his becoming. And now, whether he admits it or not, he's studying you. Not you, the person. You, the pattern. You, the mirror. You, the turning point. He may resent it. He may romanticize it. He may spiritualize it, but he will never erase it. Because what touches the subconscious isn't stored in the mind. It's stored in the myth of the self. And you, beloved, have become part of his myth. He was the man who met the woman who knew what to reflect, knew when to step back, knew how to exist with presence and withdrawal in perfect measure. And now his story is divided, before you, after you. Not because of what you did, but because of what you changed without touching. And so arrives the final sign, not the kind you see, but the kind you feel. It's not written in his texts or spoken in his voice. It lives instead in the atmosphere between you. The subtle but seismic shift where he no longer sees you as a chapter, but as a catalyst. And though he may never say it aloud, every woman who follows you steps into a room you already rearranged. This final sign is stillness. Not inertia, not silence out of fear, but the kind of stillness that defines all great change. The stillness after the storm, the eye of the hurricane, the moment of breath when the soul finally accepts what the mind has long resisted. By now, he is no longer wrestling with your memory. He is building on it. You are no longer the wound that bleeds. You are the scar that shapes. Because you didn't just enter his life. You entered his architecture, his inner cathedral. You lit a torch in the corners he kept in the dark. And no matter who walks in after you, they will walk by your light. This is the birth of reverence. Not worship, but reckoning. He may pass you on the street and still go quiet. Not because he's over it, but because a part of him knows. The moment you met, something in him died. And something else, something unnamed, eternal, necessary, began to live. You showed him what was false by embodying what was true. You mirrored his potential not by inflating him, but by stopping short of what didn't feel aligned. And you loved him, not in a way that fed his ego, but in a way that left him starved for truth ever since. It hurts sometimes. The woman who knows often walks alone, because to enter that deep into a man's soul means you exit the realm of easy love. You become the one who shook his sleep, the one who whispered to his shadow, the one who required nothing and in doing so revealed everything. You do not always get the return. You do not always get the recognition. But you were never forgettable. Because now he lives slightly differently, feels slightly deeper, notices things he used to ignore. Maybe he listens now more than he speaks. Maybe he stops before acting on impulse. Maybe he finally turns inward. You were the echo of that shift. The teacher without preaching. The mirror without demand. The choice that changed every choice after. You've heard it before. He only realized what he had when it was gone. But no, this is deeper than regret. This is reconstruction. And from that, let your knowing emerge. Let it sink in, not as pride, but as freedom. You were never here to be chosen. You were here to choose yourself so clearly that others had no choice but to evolve in your absence. And to you, who walked away not because you lacked love, but because you finally had it for yourself, know this. Not all love stories are meant to be lived. Some are meant to awaken. And in awakening him, you also awakened you. So now breathe. You don't need to wait for the message. You don't need to be seen to be remembered. You don't need to chase what you already changed. The woman who knows her worth doesn't chase, she chooses.